Hey, everybody. It's 11 a.m. Pacific time on Saturday, October 12th. It's David. I'm here. I want to share some thoughts about polls and about what's going on with national polls and state polls. It's the most easiest thing for people to see are polls. And so we tend to ride or die with polls, and it can be extremely uh, nerve-wracking if you're paying attention to polls. We have often talked about in this Withcp podcast about the many data points that you got to pay attention to that are not polls. This includes early vote data. We've shared some of that. Looks really good in Pennsylvania. We've included enthusiasm of voters. Dems are much higher than that, than Republicans right now. We've included fundraising numbers. Great energy on the Dem side. We've included the generic congressional ballot data, which is people's preferences for who should be in charge or in control of Congress. The Dems are ahead on that. And even when you look at national polls and state polls, Harris has got the lead, but it's close in those polls. And there can always be a poll here and a poll there that definitely suggests otherwise. And you also have this big lurking political phenomenon that is Donald Trump, where he's constantly talking about being ahead in the polls. So he achieves his goals of convincing people that he's ahead in the polls. So I want to talk about polls, and I want to do it today. And then tomorrow, which is Sunday, I want to talk specifically about not polls, but about what Trump's closing argument is, this racial demagoguery that he's involved, he's committed to, and how it has become our defining moment as a country in our lifetimes to respond to that. These are two kind of like mini talks. And on the weekends, I try I often end up doing these podcasts just solo because trying to give space for all of our incredible leaders to be out doing work in the field. And I don't want them to have to kind of make time for this. It's not as important to join this podcast. It's more important to be doing the work in the states we're in. And right now we're in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Arizona, New York, Montana, Washington State, Maryland this weekend. Incredibly important. So there is this phenomenon in American political life that really began it's begun in the last 10 years because it's the rise of disinformation in the polling space. Disinformation is omnipresent everywhere in our society. Lies upon lies upon lies about hurricane relief, about immigrants, about teleprompters, about science, about global warming, about so many things. It is an unleashed tsunami in the American political space. And polling is no exception to this. So here's what we saw in 2022 definitively, is we saw a rise of Republican-aligned polling organizations that began to do polls and push a narrative that the Republicans were going to have a red wave, that they were going to, cruise to victory in the Senate, win the House by a big margin, and that the low approval ratings of Joe Biden were going to be devastating for the Democrats. And so you saw what is called flooding the zone, which Republican pollsters would do polls after polls after polls of key races, key states, and they would manipulate the data in such a way that it would suggest that Republicans were far in the lead, that the momentum was with them, that the Democrats should stay home, that there's no chance. And all it does is scare and discourage people who pay attention to the polls who are rooting for the Democrats. And that's what it does. It is a psychological operation, a psyops endeavor. And it has been effective in driving media coverage, media discourse. And so then it gets to us. It gets to us if you pay attention to news coverage. And unless you really, really work intentionally and thoughtfully through the polling morass, then you're going to get swamped by it. We will. And that's what happens. And that's exactly what the psychological operation is intended for. It is now happening right now. It is definitively going on right now that there is a number of Republican-leaning pollsters that are creating data that is intended to discourage and make all Democrats scared, anxious, doubting, discouraged, just ready to quit. And then Trump's loud voices about him winning further amplifies and beats that drum. So I want to share a little bit of information that captures this and then give one very concrete example of how this plays out. So let's see here. Excellent. This is Adam Carlson right here. Adam Carlson is a really thoughtful political analyst. Definitely leans Democratic. He was a pro-Biden person, and is somebody who's kind of made his mark with some interesting analyses. And this is what he shows us. He says, this is a tweet on October 11th, that's yesterday, at 8:50 a.m. Pacific time. Since September 30th, last Monday, there have been almost as many Republican-aligned polls released as nonpartisan polls, with Democratic-aligned polls basically non-existent. So nonpartisan polls, 33 since September 30th, Republican-aligned polls, 26, Democratic-aligned polls, 1. He then went back and modified this because he had made one he wanted to make one adjustment. And so the numbers were even more skewed. It was 32 nonpartisan polls, 27 Republican polls. So this is what it looks like. These are the Republican-aligned polls that we've seen since September 30th. Insider Advantage, Fabrizio McLaughlin, On Message, Trafalgar, American Greatness, SoCal, Arc Insights, and then all of these other nonpartisan ones over on the right that we've seen in that span of time, with virtually none from the Democrats. Now, this is the asymmetry of the misinformation environment and universe, is that Republicans have learned that disinformation is their friend. They are committed to it wholeheartedly. They have advanced their initiatives and agendas with this. And we who are committed to truth and democracy have to wade our way through it with all the care and thought that comes with this. If you don't, you get swept along in the tsunami, the storm surge. When you look at them by state, Republican-aligned polls are all over the place. They're in every state. And what they do is they move the averages per state. They move them a point or two this way. And when they do that, they start to create this doom and gloom mindset among Democrats. This intentionality, this attempt to shape the polling impressions is a deliberate strategy by the Republicans and conservatives. They're doing it for two reasons, okay? The first is to create, as I've been talking about, this discouragement, this despair, this doubt, this questioning among Democrats of whether or not we can win, and to create a despair, a sense of we cannot do it. That is the first and foremost goal. That's the initial goal. Now, let's go over here. This is a Simon Rosenberg analysis. Simon is a Democratic strategist, and he points out how it is that of the last 15, this is from yesterday in the afternoon, this tweet, of the last 15 general election polls released in Pennsylvania, 12 have right GOP affiliations. All right, conservative GOP affiliations. Their campaign to game the polling averages and make it appear like Trump is winning when he isn't escalated in the last few days. Polling averages now post Helene, that's when this is really amped up with all of the misinformation and disinformation that Trump and all have put forward, has begun to shift the polling averages to the right. This happened in 2022, and it discouraged Democrats. In the end, we have to cut through this and do our work, because a vote is not the same thing as a poll. And a vote requires us to take action and to cast our opinions in a concrete form. And when we look at votes, the Dems have been winning since the Dobbs decision. They've been winning since Trump was elected, actually. But these polls, they capture so much of the progressive psyche. They're being manufactured. In the words of Tim Walz in Detroit the other day, Republicans aren't good at manufacturing anything except bullshit. Okay? So the first reason is to discourage and make us despair. All right? The second reason is to create a narrative that allows Trump and MAGA to claim that they had the election stolen from them, that the election was stolen, that they were winning, they were winning, they were winning, they were winning. That they did win this election, and that what's going to go on is going to be fraud, and that this time it's even worse than the supposed fraud of 2020. So this narrative of constructing the Republicans in the lead is completely strategic to both create despair and disappointment among the Democrats, and to give Republicans the license, the platform, the pedestal to make the case when they lose that it was stolen from them. It is straight asymmetric warfare, and the Democrats, by not running their own polls, give up the space. They do. But I'm not here to focus on whether the Democrats should run these polls or not, because there's a disingenuity in creating these polling that I'm not a fan of. And so I'm not here to say the Democrats should create them. What I am here to say is that we have to be able to see it for what it is. We have to be able to put on the truth glasses and to understand that these polls are being manufactured for a certain purpose, and they are not truthful. They are not genuine. They are not authentic. They are not accurate. They are being done for a particular ideological purpose. And we cannot allow the first one to get us. We cannot allow it to create the despair and the discouragement. On the second piece, the ability for us to be ready to respond and hang in there when the assault on truth comes after the election is something that we are certainly giving attention to at Common Power and planning for those weeks afterwards. But right now, we have to not give in on item one, the truth about the polls. Okay. Here's a piece from an analyst that I pay attention to that talks about this is Swan Marcus. And he says, it's crazy people keep bringing up 2016 and 2020 when it's blatantly obvious that the polling environment right now looks like 2022, when Democrats were underestimated in every swing state because right-wing pollsters tried to move the polling averages with slop. That's what's going on. We cannot give in to that. So here's an example. American Greatness is a super PAC that, as it sounds like, supports Donald Trump. American Greatness did a poll with TIP, T-I-P-P. What does TIP stand for? Let's see. Technometrica. That's the T. Technometrica Institute of Policy and Politics. And it's a conservative organization. They did a poll with the super PAC, American Greatness of Pennsylvania. This poll came out a couple days ago. I think it came out on Thursday because there was an awful lot of analysis of it on Friday. In their initial analysis, they did a random survey of people in Pennsylvania, and they asked them, how likely are you to vote? And you could be extremely likely, very likely, somewhat likely, not at all likely. In their initial analysis, they found Kamala Harris up by 4 points in the state. All right. In their initial analysis. In their initial analysis, they focused just on what they call registered voters, regardless of where the registered voters answered that question of likelihood to vote. So all registered voters were included in their first analysis. Kamala Harris up by 4, which is right where consistent nonpartisan polls are showing them, including one from the New York Times today. But then they did an analysis where they said, we want to identify the likely voters. And every polling organization chooses to do, they can choose or not choose to do what they call likely voters analysis. And when they do that, they make decisions about which items in their survey are going to determine who qualifies as a likely to vote citizen. All right, a likely to vote citizen. In Philadelphia, which is a Democratic stronghold, there were 160 or so Democrats. I'm sorry, 160 or so people in Philadelphia who are in the initial registered voters poll. Of them, 130 plus said, I am extremely or very likely to vote. All right. Because of this, they should absolutely be considered extremely or very likely to vote. They should. However, in this analysis, American Greatness / TIP used a host of measures. And in fact, they weighted anybody who was a person of color and was younger, person of color and or younger, as unlikely to vote. They just weighted them that way. They just decided to do that. And when they did that, they took out 130 plus of the 160 people from Philadelphia so that their likely voter data did not include them. And they found a likely voter analysis that had Trump up by 1 point. This analysis is so fraudulent, is so outright fraudulent that various political analysis jumped on this and said, you can't do this. And so there's been this robust conversation about whether or not this is a legitimate poll, whether or not it should be included in the averages. Some include it. Real Clear Politics 538 does. Others say, no way, you can't make that kind of decision. You can't do that. That's ridiculous. But that's exactly the kind of manipulation that is occurring. And American Greatness and TIP is in the Republican conservative leaning poll. So yeah, if you take out Philadelphia, the Dems are going to lose Pennsylvania. But this is an absolute racist, ideologically strategic, and horrible approach that has 2 strategies. 1, to make them fearful and despairing and doubting, and 2, to create a narrative that Trump et al. Is winning so that they can claim victory. They got caught in this instance. American Greatness Tip did, because the gap between the registered voters analysis and the likely voter analysis was so pro-Trump that it just didn't make sense, because there's all this enthusiasm for Harris at all. So the notion that that many likely voters would fall out of the Democratic coalition in this very energized state where the Dems are really doing great in early voting just didn't ring true to people. So they demanded it. They demanded explanations, and a bunch of pollster analysts contacted them and asked for their explanation. And so we got it. We got the explanation, and it's unacceptable. So our goal at all times here is to be able to be clear-eyed about the way disinformation is being used, to not just throw up our arms and say, oh my God, I don't know, I'm despairing, I'm discouraged. It is to use trusted sources like the analysis that we bring you that tells us of the accuracy and the genuineness of what's going on in our environment. This approach of flooding the zone with these Republican pollsters create what's known as the red mirage. The red mirage is a mirage that suggests that Republicans are winning and are winning convincingly. We have to call BS on that, and we have to live it out, people. You have to believe it. We have to genuinely embrace that this is bullshit and live out the truth. Otherwise, we let it win. We let it win. We can't. Okay? We cannot. We cannot allow that. I want to finish with Ben Wickler. Ben is the chair of the Wisconsin Democratic Party, someone that we've worked, this organization, the Wisconsin Dems, we've worked extensively with. And Wickler is widely considered one of the best Democratic Party chairs in the country. And it is under his leadership in the Wisconsin Dems work and our work with the Wisconsin Dems that gives us a lot of confidence about Wisconsin and our chances there. This is what Wickler says. This is October 11th, middle of the day yesterday. Polls in Wisconsin are tightening. The presidential, the Senate race, they're now hold your breath close, but don't hold your breath. I'm going to dig into the polling and the battle plan in this thread, but I'm going to say it up front. The thing you and I can most affect is our ground game. Fund it, fuel it, chip in here for them. Organizing turns intent, which pollsters measures intent, into actual votes. All right. Let's start with the Senate in Wisconsin. Tammy Baldwin's Senate race is now a toss-up. How? Well, their opponent, the Republican opponent, Hovde, shook up his team, went 100% negative, and tightened the race. The Cook Political Report found a 2% margin for Baldwin. Meanwhile, in the presidential race, that one polling average has Harris's lead down to 0.3% in Wisconsin. That's Real Clear Politics, by the way, folks. Someone that includes all of these flooding the zone Republican pollsters. The Senate, the presidential race, and battles in the House and state legislature will come down to the wire. So what now? It's time for people power. For the next 25 days, from now until the polls close on November 5th, we flood the zone. We, everywhere, everything, everywhere, all at once. On our side, we've been building for this moment for the last 8 years. We finally won fair maps in the state legislature because they won the Supreme Court in the state, and we've helped them with that. And so we're engaging voters in every corner of the state. Hundreds of neighborhood teams and dozens of county parties, in our youth chapters and caucuses, in our group chats and our social media feeds, we're rallying and then talking to voters. Meanwhile, on the Republican side, crickets, or miraculously tweets. The Republicans' ground game is now the domain of the richest person in the world. Elon Musk's super PAC is running the organizing for Trump. Reporting today suggests that Musk may be pumping in hundreds of millions of dollars, including in Wisconsin. What will Musk buy for that money? His website says he's paying canvassers $30 an hour to knock on doors and paying swing state voters $47 to sign a petition. But we're not seeing a lot of evidence in our state that doors are actually getting knocked on by his folks. We see some door hangers here and there. One single Democratic volunteer has told me they saw an American PAC canvasser once. But it's not like previous years where we Dems saw GOP canvassers on the street in town after town. The gulf between the ground games doesn't mean we can rest easy. In fact, it's the exact opposite. If the polls are tied, we need to organize like we're 1 point behind, and the next door we knock could be the one that tips the whole election. All right? This election will be won by whichever side closes stronger. Every one of us is part of that. And he goes on to sign up for volunteer shifts, give money, contribute, all right? The worst thing we can do is pay attention to the polls. The best things we can do is take action, all right? The red Mirage is exactly what Donald Trump used in 2020 to claim victory and to create this lost cause idea that his election was stolen. They are doing it again. Of course they are. They're doing it with more ferocity than they did in 2020. We have our answer. It is our volunteer efforts. It is our time and treasure efforts, folks, okay? Do not take polls at face value, folks. They are strategically designed in many cases to fuel a certain narrative. It's up to us to cut through that. All right? Hang in, hang on. Let's do the work every day for the next month. All right? Do not allow this propaganda, that's what it is, propaganda, to carry our hearts and our minds. Everybody out in the field, thank you. Everybody who listens to this podcast who's not on the field, let's mobilize to support these folks. Thanks.